What was better? A year comprising of Nintendo's first home console of the new millennium, as well as a handheld that would dominate its own market, or a different transitional year featuring a hybrid system that would combine both into one device that you could play anywhere, anytime you chose? Let's find out in today's episode of Year versus Year. Going head to head today, we have 2001 versus 2017. 2 years featuring two very different console launches and two very different strategical approaches from Nintendo. Back in 2001, Hiroshi Yamauchi was still president of Nintendo and had been since 1949. So in this period, you can still see many of his core philosophies present in the way that Nintendo conducted itself, choosing fun and creativity over graphics and hardware specs. However, with a gap of over a year after the massively successful PlayStation 2, it was clear that they had to do something. And so, Nintendo's Project Dolphin was unveiled, and they revealed to the world the Nintendo GameCube for the first time.
This car's got style, so listen up, dude. She can shake it, talk to her. She's quick and nimble when she needs to be. She can blow through the air and climb up trees. If you choose her, you're not choose wrong with a skip and a hot cheese. One good car.
The GameCube had hardware specs that rivaled and even surpassed that of its main competitor at the time. The caveat being, however, that Nintendo had chosen to go with 1.5GB mini DVDs instead of the higher capacity DVDs available at the time, which meant that even though it had better hardware than the PS2, some games had to be shipped with multiple discs in order to be fully playable. But it ended up being a moot point since the Xbox launched later in 2001, boasting even more powerful hardware. Speaking of moot points, one of the main criticisms levied at the GameCube was that unlike both of its competitors, it didn't support DVD playback or CDs, and at the time, both of these things were extremely important to most consumers. Even if now it's not one of the first things we think about for a home console, but Nintendo was very weary of piracy, and doing things this way would make it much harder for their games to be copied and distributed illegally. However, this was at the cost of being able to get a handle on the competition. So the GameCube did many things differently, things that a lot of people may have shaken their head at, especially in that time. But did their offerings have no value then? Or were they simply misunderstood and, to that point, undervalued by most consumers at the time? It's hard to argue with being able to have a DVD player, music player, and a game console all on one, especially for a great price. But time has been kind to the GameCube and its lineup of games, boasting a library that contains what many consider to be some of the best of all time. However, since the GameCube launched in November of 2001, the lineup of games for the console becomes somewhat limited in that year. But before going over those, the Nintendo 64 still hasn't heard no bell yet. Conker's Bad Fur Day, Paper Mario, Pokemon Stadium 2, Mario Party 3, and Dr. Mario 64 all released in 2001, giving the console a proper send-off with a handful of fantastic titles. So what did the GameCube get then for its arrival on the scene? Well, it saw 20 titles throughout 2001, with its launch titles consisting of All-Star Baseball 2002, Batman Vengeance, Crazy Taxi, Dave Mirra Freestyle BMX 2, Luigi's Mansion, Madden NFL 2002, NHL Hits 2002, Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader, Super Monkey Ball, Tarzan Untamed, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 3, and Wave Race Blue Storm. Making up the remainder of 2001, you got FIFA Soccer 2002, XG3 Extreme G Racing, Pikmin, SSX Tricky, Super Smash Bros. Melee, The Simpsons Road Rage, Universal Studios Theme Parks Adventure, and NFL Quarterback Club 2002. Overall, a solid mix of first and third-party titles alike. Star Wars Rogue Squadron 2 Rogue Leader was exclusive to the GameCube, which sported impressive visuals and graphically still largely holds up to this day. Another exclusive, Super Monkey Ball, an enhanced port of a Japanese arcade game published by Sega, was the beginning of a very important relationship between Sega and Nintendo, since support for the Dreamcast had been discontinued earlier that year. As for first-party titles, you had an impressive start. Luigi's Mansion, an action-adventure game, saw Luigi saving the day, exploring a haunted mansion in an effort to save his brother Mario. Wave Race Blue Storm, the successor to the beloved Nintendo 64 game, gave the lineup something you could use to directly see the improvement of the hardware. On that note, Pikmin gave players an experience never before seen on a home console. The ability to control up to 100 three-dimensional characters in real time, giving birth to one of Nintendo's core IPs. And last but certainly not least, we had Super Smash Bros. Melee. An absolute beast of a game, jam-packed with content, 26 playable characters, a plethora of different game modes to choose from whether single or multiplayer, next-generation interpretations of beloved locations from the best of Nintendo, and a soundtrack that is still on loop in the minds of many gamers. The game was simply an achievement in itself, making some of the best use of the well-designed GameCube controller. The controller itself featured an analog stick with octagonal gates for precision movement, a C-stick that sometimes felt underutilized. The face buttons were sized differently than most controllers, but worked great nonetheless, as well as being clearly labeled and identifiable. The triggers were hybrid, meaning they had both analog and digital inputs, and were extremely satisfying to press. A simple start button was centered on the controller, and a Z button was placed between the face buttons and the right trigger. The part that left the most to be desired, however, was the D-pad. Not too awful at a glance, but playing any games that utilized the later released 2003 Game Boy Player made things difficult, as it was described as being mushy, with misinputs happening frequently. Overall, however, the GameCube controller has in fact stood the test of time, still a favorite among many, and still being produced in the modern day. But what did play those Game Boy games well in 2001? The answer to that question would be the Game Boy Advance. Released on June 11th of 2001, the Game Boy Advance was already in a league of its own right out of the gate, easily crushing its competition with better portability and battery life. Despite criticism for lack of a backlit screen, the form factor and games released stood second to none. The handheld system had already reached a number of 109 games for its library in just the first year, with some notable releases being Wario Land 4, Golden Sun, Advance Wars, F-Zero Maximum Velocity, Tony Hawk's Pro Skater 2, Castlevania Circle of the Moon, Super Mario Advance, and Nintendo's own kart racer being on a handheld for the first time. Developed by Intelligent Systems, Mario Kart Super Circuit quickly became a fan favorite, and it's easy to see why. Sporting SNES levels of visuals and snappy eccentric gameplay that the series was known for, all in the palm of your hand. It was extremely impressive for its time, becoming the best-selling non-Pokemon game for the system. So, in summary, Nintendo 2001 had a whole lot going for it. Despite the newest console only having less than 2 months of breathing room, what it offered in just that short time are some of the games still talked about to this day. Bolstered by some impressive Nintendo 64 titles, and the release of a handheld that took the Game Boy platform to new heights, it's easy to see why people look back on this year with fondness. Nintendo's uphill battle had only just begun, but time has been kind to this era of Nintendo, and despite some of the appreciation being late, it has been found nonetheless. But what about a different transitional period, where we now know the transition from the Nintendo 64 to the GameCube was very rough for Nintendo? How would a transition from the struggling Wii U to the Nintendo Switch go? 2017, being one of the few years that had Tatsumi Kimishima at the helm, saw Nintendo very much going through a transitional period. Following the failure of the Wii U, and alternatively, the success of the 3DS family of systems, it was clear that Nintendo needed to pivot, to find consistency, and fast. So, Nintendo had come up with what they hoped would be the solution to their problems, and on March 3rd, 2017, the Nintendo Switch was released worldwide. Their new system was a hybrid, a console that could be played on your TV in the traditional way using a dock, or by way of handheld mode, where the system could be played in any location the user chose. The default controllers were the Joy-Cons, two detachable pieces on either side of the console that could be used separately, attached to the system, in either hand or using the Joy-Con grip. The messaging was clear in that the console was meant to be played however you wanted to play it. A Pro controller was available to purchase separately for a more ergonomical and familiar experience, which definitely had its users, with some feeling that the Joy-Cons themselves were too small or awkward to use. The Joy-Cons were laid out in a way that would essentially divide the industry standard controller in half, with a control stick and two shoulder buttons on either side, X, Y, A, B buttons on one and D-pad buttons on the other, a plus and minus button on either controller reminiscent of the Wii days, and a new capture button used to take screenshots in-game. Each Joy-Con could also be used as its own individual controller on select titles, making use of two hidden buttons along the side that would normally be out of reach if they were attached to the system. Nintendo showed the world once more that they weren't interested in being the latest and greatest when it came to graphical fidelity or console performance. Rather, their strength once again lied in being different, giving consumers a reason to make the Nintendo Switch their secondary, or in many cases, their primary system going forward. A stark contrast from the Xbox One X that released in the same year. The launch lineup of the Nintendo Switch was lacking for some, coming out with 5 physical and 5 digital games to be purchased on day one, but with Breath of the Wild being one of them, it gave many players something to chew on. The other titles were 1-2 Switch, Just Dance 2017, Skylanders Imaginators, Super Bomberman R, I Am Setsuna, Snipperclips, Shovel Knight Treasure Trove, Shovel Knight Spectre of Torment, and Fast RMX. 1-2 Switch was a sort of tech demo or introduction to the console, letting users become familiar with all the features the Switch had to offer. Joy-Con detachment and individual use, HD rumble, motion controls, gyro sensors, the IR motion camera, and handheld/tabletop versatility. It was praised for its ability to have people play a video game without actually having to look at a screen. Outside of launch day, 2017 had many notable titles for the Nintendo Switch since it launched so early in the year. Doom and The Elder Scrolls V Skyrim showed that the system could still boast impressive third-party support, even from well-known development studios like Bethesda. Mario plus Rabbids Kingdom Battle was an unexpected collaboration between Ubisoft and Nintendo, having characters from two universes collide in a strategy game filled with humor and charm. Unfortunately, however, Shigeru Miyamoto mowed down the live audience for the reveal of this game in a fit of bloodthirsty rage. Splatoon got a sequel, keeping a very similar format to the first, but adding just enough to keep players excited and wanting more, cementing itself as a new respectable Nintendo staple that wasn't leaving anytime soon. Super Mario Odyssey was the latest 3D Mario game to hit the scene, having Mario traveling to different lands using his new companion Cappy to directly take control of enemies instead of traditional power-ups that the series had become known for. A new first-party IP launch also occurred with ARMS, an innovative fighting game featuring opponents with extendable limbs that would be used to attack their opponent. The heavily anticipated Xenoblade Chronicles 2 also launched late that year, with some criticism of the anime aesthetic and overindulging in fan service. But fans widely enjoyed the game, praising its world and music, as well as its combat, thus making Xenoblade another series that would stick around going forward. But the most important Nintendo Switch game that launched in 2017 wasn't originally meant to be a Switch game, but since the Wii U was no longer receiving support, Mario Kart 8 would find new life in its deluxe version. This definitive version of the game had all the DLC tracks, parts, and characters released up until that point. It also changed it up by allowing the holding of 2 items this time around, making the game more dynamic as well as chaotic. Arguably the most important change was to the game's battle mode, replacing the odd choice of hosting battles on existing courses from the Wii U to a more appropriate arena-style zone that was more in line with what the series had already established. Some notable digital releases came in the form of SteamWorld Dig 2, Blaster Master Zero, Golf Story, Kimiko, and many more. Support was dwindling for Wii U in 2017 obviously, but it did get Breath of the Wild, Darksiders, Just Dance 2017 and 18, and several eShop titles. More importantly though, over on the 3DS, we still saw approximately 30 to 40 major retail titles coming to the system in 2017. Nintendo didn't know if the Switch would be as successful as we now know it would come to be, so the 3DS was still going very strong. Some of the most notable titles in this period were Fire Emblem Echoes: Shadows of Valentia, Mario & Luigi Superstar Saga plus Bowser's Minions, Hey Pikmin, Miitopia, Metroid Samus Returns, Pokemon Ultra Sun and Ultra Moon, Mario Party The Top 100, Kirby Battle Royale, Ever Oasis, Apollo Justice Ace Attorney, Layton's Mystery Journey, and Poochie and Yoshi's Woolly World, another port from the Wii U. The list is long, showing that Nintendo wasn't quite ready to put all their eggs in one basket just yet. Also releasing was the Nintendo 2DS XL on July 28th, a few months after the launch date of the Nintendo Switch. Overall, 2017 was a very interesting year for Nintendo. So, in summary, Nintendo's 2017 showed a strong pivot in a positive direction for the company, a brand new system that had mass appeal amongst fans and newcomers alike, serving a plethora of well-received games spanning many different genres. 2017 also saw an ugly end for the Wii U, but an ever stronger lineup of 3DS games with a new system on top. So how do these 2 years stack up against each other? Both are transitional in nature, but still receive support from their predecessor consoles. The GameCube had less than 2 months to shine in 2001, but still manages to put forth a very impressive lineup. The Nintendo Switch, having the majority of 2017, was able to put out a number of its own impressive and well-received games in kind. 2001 saw the release of the Game Boy Advance, with some of its most beloved games being released right out of the gate, along with critically acclaimed titles still being released for the Nintendo 64. 2017 had a withering Wii U, but a still very strong 3DS lineup. Both of these years, as different or similar as they are, showed Nintendo's willingness to try something different, even in the face of uncertainty and an ever-changing industry landscape. Who do you think should be crowned the victor? Nintendo's 2001 year or Nintendo's 2017 year? The choice, as it always has been, is yours. Simply go over to the post tab on the channel to cast your vote on the poll I'll be running alongside the release of this video. The results will be shown in the next episode of the series. Thank you for watching, and until next time, have a Goob day.